right. So a little bit about me and where this is coming from. And I know we're all in different areas, and that's probably my first question is, while I talk about me, is what made you choose this one? So what made you choose this presentation? So a little bit about me. I am actually from Las Vegas. That lovely little mountain in the back that you see there is a desert mountain. It's actually called Mount Scorpion now. It's been officially named. And we are a Nevada State University, which is the only teaching state university in Nevada. Um, we have in Nevada, we actually only have seven full state-funded schools, so we're actually pretty small in that realm. And we're the only teaching university, so there's two R1s, one up in Reno and one down by us in Las Vegas. And then we have several community colleges in there too, all the way throughout the state. So I this school, as lovely as it looks, is actually it's on the outskirts of Las Vegas, so it's right on the edge in Henderson. If anybody's been to Las Vegas, Henderson is a suburb, and as you can see, it's right. If I were to show you my back right now, my window goes right up against that mountain. So we are right on the edge of the city before you actually get out of the entire city. That means a few things. Essentially, it's not rural, but we have horses that go by us all the time. So we're considered even a rural area, even though Las Vegas is not 5 to 10 minutes away. And because we're a teaching university, we have been, we have quite a few students that are not wanting to the R1 university status or can't get into those programs, or they're transferring from our community college to here. And then we are predominantly, and I'm going to give you some more stats while we're kind of waiting for people to come in. We are predominantly uh, uh, Hispanic Serving Institute. And then we also, our main ones are going to be teaching. So we're trying to help the teaching pipeline as well as nursing. So that's a little bit about me as we're letting people trickle in. Um, and I did want to mention, I didn't even mention about like my previous, I actually worked at our R1 university here, UNLV, for about 20 years. And I came over here, one, because this was the very first director of assessment job that Nevada State has ever had in their 25 years of existence. And then two, I just love our student population. So our student population is probably the best population, and I think that's kind of a sign of small, medium, and even community colleges, as we often get these really great students that try their darndest, but that means we also have to help them out a lot more too. So even more is supposed to be is the reason for this position. And so let me get into a few things. I will be putting in chat discussion some of these questions. You don't have to write them now, and I know people are putting in now some of the prompt questions. The first one is what made you choose this presentation? And then I'll be talking about some of the other ones and I'll be adding them as we go. I'm one of those people that like to think ahead, and then before you know it, the chat's done. So I like to give kind of a preview. And then we're going to talk about kind of how you currently engage with faculty and assessment needs. That's coming up soon. And then what do you think is the most successful strategy? And then how we can actually support each other as individuals. That's actually my doctoral dissertation, is to looking into these medium and small sized universities that are classically underfunded, and how each one of those universities can almost come together to help to create the templates and create meaningful collaborative experiences. So I am putting, again, because we added a few people, all of my resources here. I believe in giving everything, so you'll see a lot of these resources as I go through the PowerPoint presentation. All right, so let's get into it. Our learning outcomes is we're going to talk a little bit about how I got into the role, and then how we transitioned into some more program level assessment, kind of historical. And I'm sure most of you guys, as I'm seeing these comments are going, are probably feeling the same thing. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Canvas outcomes. I'm a Canvas outcome super user, so you'll see there's a small uh, information about Canvas outcomes. So I'll give you some information about that. And then I'm going to talk about key strategies for kind of streamlining outcome assessment and how I can help with faculty for that. And then I'm going to compare those different approaches with some of my faculty members, and I have some good quotes from them. And then in that all, you're welcome to use any of the templates as I'm going through them and how we establish some of this culture of assessment. So before that, though, just to give you some information, we're a public four-year institute. We do have about 8,000 students, but that's kind of a misnomer. I don't know if any of you are the same way. We have 4,202 concurrent students, which means they are in the high schools. So essentially, they're not contributing to most of our retention. We are trying to do some methods to do some direct admissions for that. So that's all strategic enrollment items. And then, of course, we have to do some assessment on those concurrent enrollments, but we're very large population of concurrent enrollment. And I believe we might be the largest in the state for concurrent enrollment, specifically in Las Vegas. So I'm not sure if anybody else is on that track. But as you can see, there's more concurrent enrollment than we do have undergraduate students. So we also have 51 different majors. Again, nursing and education are our big ones, but we do have a regular liberal arts, science, and business. We don't have some of the other ones like arts. So we're pretty low in arts right now, although there's talks about it. And we actually just established athletics. So we didn't have athletics before, but now we are the first school to have the flag football for females, which is super cool in Nevada. So it's really kind of helping out some of those athletes that can't get into some of those higher level courses, but that's kind of what's happening. And we do have graduate degree programs. There's only 3 right now, but they're high level needs in Nevada, which includes educational psychology. We're one of the lowest in school mental health resources. So we have that. And we have a speech pathology, and now we just created our master's in nursing. So we do have some graduate level in there too. Here's some historical perspectives as we're talking about everything. One, I told you previously, or those that just came in, is that I was the first director of assessment. So before me, they, of course, everybody has accreditation needs, and every single accreditation unit will have something assessment, and you'll see our accrediting body, which is NWCCU, Northwest Commission. They require assessment. In our assessment, we got a ding on assessment. That's the reason why I exist, because our assessment was not ongoing, it wasn't systematic, and it didn't allow for continuous improvement. So I began close to 3 years ago with a blank slate. And sometimes that's good because you get to figure things out, but sometimes it's bad because that means there's not a lot of assessment that's been going on in previous years. And we do have classically a lot of faculty members that have been here for many, many years. That's kind of our historical process of what was happening, is that they would do yearly and they would come in and do what's called an assessment summit. And in that assessment summit is when they were doing program assessment. So it was almost like a one-stop shop. So they would have a rubric and say, one-stop shop, everybody has to do this rubric, and you can change up the rubric a little bit. And then they wouldn't talk about assessment for the rest of the year. And then they never went back for that continuous improvement piece, which is about making sure that everything was followed up and what kind of changes they're actually being made. That in itself was a little problematic in my push to kind of build this culture of assessment, is because they didn't want to like make it kind of more ongoing and not just the one-stop shop. So there's a little bit of, I guess, edge for me coming in. But because, and many of you guys are all in assessment, you know the best way to start helping with faculty is to make sure that you're available and you have a very fast feedback. And so I started that process in the first year. We're going to kind of talk about how we built that culture of assessment. And so on that, I'm going to kind of do my little second question in here. Like, how do you currently engage with faculty for your assessment needs? And then we're going to talk a little bit about how I went about it being in a new role and then in a new area and a span. So I call this Act One because this is really my first year when I was in the role and what I actually did to implement this culture of assessment. So I had to establish a new process that enables faculty to create those assessments that were ongoing and systematic. We also wanted them to be individualized, so we didn't want that one-stop shop. We want to make sure that it's meaningful. We want to make sure that because again, I kind of told you about our students are sometimes in the lower realm, low first generation. I think we have over 60% first generation last time I checked. We wanted to make sure that those students were taken care of and at the assessment level instead of just graduation and retention level, as many as you know that graduation retention sometimes doesn't give the clear picture. But we also wanted it to be flexible and transparent. So flexibility is a really important key to me. If a faculty member says, I for sure can't do that assessment plan, I always make sure that I contact them and get some follow-up on what they could possibly do because we know in small universities some of these programs have 1 to 2 faculty and that's it. And if one person goes on a FMLA, you're done, right? So we have to be flexible in this kind of time and need. And then recognizing that we have budget constraints, as you all may know. Being in here, I'm sure you're here for a reason because of the budget constraints. So we don't have an assessment technology. And so everything kind of had to be meaningful to them and something that I can manage pretty well, or at least try to manage. So this is like a typical, I'm sure you probably have this one too, but I want to kind of just review it. This is what I established at the very beginning. They didn't even have anything like this, which was showing about the cyclical or continuous improvement aspects. But our first year, our year one, we did, let me actually put a little laser pointer. We did all of this in our year one. Each program established their mission statement. Each program redid their program learning outcomes. They had program learning outcomes, but they were not smart, meaningful, and attainable. And we also established curriculum mapping and aligning. So year one, I worked with every one of our majors. I haven't worked with minors, a few of them like school-based mental health, the ones that kind of go into our graduate programs. But we worked with all of our majors to almost do a clean slate. And that clean slate is probably what helped me out the most in my building of culture of assessment. It was a hard year for me. I'm not telling you anything. It's not like the easiest, but it made it so that I created these relationships and allowed them to recognize there's different ways to do things. And may have taken some faculty 2 months to get on board with me, and some faculty are still like maybe 20% on board with me, but I at least got almost all of them on board with me to kind of complete this. So this first year we did that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what the faculty say in that. And then we take that information, and I had them also create an assessment plan for the next, and I made them do it up to 10 years. But again, flexibility is key. That's only the reason why I do the up to 10 years is to ensure that sustainability with these small units, if one faculty member goes, that we have some backup. So I made them do it up to 10 years with with lots of flexibility in there. And then the year 2, and we're in our year 3 now, but year 2 and beyond, then they're just collecting data. They complete an annual report, and I'll show you some of that. Then we review assessment plan. Again, flexibility is key, where they can always change out, and they institute any changes. We also have a process, and I know this seems long, and I think it seems long to me, but we're required by NSHE, which is our Nevada State Higher Education Unit, to only assess all programs every 10 years. So these small annual reports, even though I make them do annual, they feed into that. They're almost like little mini program reviews. So although we don't assess a program review in detail. Our program review is pretty extensive, and I think I gave you guys that template as well in there. In my templates, we won't go over too much. But each one of those little annual reports are just little snippets, and they do add in all the way to our program review. So that's kind of the setup for how I did it. And again, year one activities, we did program learning outcomes. We created this program course map where we did the assessment plan and we did some annual assessment reporting. And I'm going to show you some of those and how we did it. And all those templates are located in the, you'll start seeing, if you didn't get the code, I'll send it up again, but you'll start seeing some QR codes that come in. And we'll talk a little bit about them and how the faculty reacted to some of these items. So the first one is to create learning outcomes. Again, their learning outcomes were not measurable. They used way too low level Bloom's taxonomy. We all know that. So I worked with every single program to come up with some really good program learning outcomes. And within those program learning outcomes, we made sure we map them to each one of those courses. Both of those things, creating the learning outcomes and mapping to the courses, actually created almost like a domino effect where even faculty in that first year recognized that some of their courses didn't went overboard on some of the program learning outcomes, and some of the courses didn't even discuss any program learning outcomes. So there was quite a bit, even though this was the only thing that I made them do that first year, there was still quite a good shift in curriculum, just because as they were trying to map things, they recognized that a course might not be good for their program. So they put it as elective, or a course has too much curriculum, and so they started to kind of calm down some of the curriculum and shift it into some of those higher level courses. So it did create almost like a domino effect of some of that mechanisms. One of the best examples is criminal justice, and I think that's this is math. Let me talk about math first. So math, they're going through their 10-year program review right now. And math wanted to create program learning outcomes. I advise always to only have 3 to 5 program learning outcomes. However, math really wanted to make it so that they were, and if you see this, let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. If you could see it, they wanted it by like perspective, critical thinking, technology, and then personal development. So that did create a little bit more on there. So with math, and of course, thinking about math and how math is all numerically related, they created a really neat and usable course map system. And I'll show you that right now. Hold on, it's being weird. And no, you don't have to look at anything, but recognize that the 1, if you look down here, the 1 is beginning, all the way to 4 is advanced. So for example, calculus will have mostly 1s because that's a 100 level course. However, some of the upper divisions like linear algebra, I would not know anything about this, by the way, or linear algebra or abstract algebra, would have 3s or 4s all the way across. So they made it so they can assess every single learning outcome in every single course. So they created those learning outcomes in order to do that. So they were general enough, but specific enough at a good high level to assess all the way across. And currently, this is what's really neat about this one. This is what's really neat about this one. Can you hear me now? I think my headset went off. Am I good? Sorry. I charged it too, but for some reason it didn't keep the charge. But they were one of the first ones to do Canvas outcomes. If anybody has used Canvas outcomes, it's already in our LMS. I do have to do some back end work, but we use Canvas outcomes to make it more systematic. So the students actually travel with the PLO one. So as they're going with Math 181, they're doing PLO 1 or PLO 2 or PLO 3. And then by the time they're a senior and doing this introduction to rail analysis, we have seen that PLO this many times. So what is that, like 12 courses? And so you can see the progression of students. They're only 2 years into this process, so we haven't seen the exact progression of the students, of course, but they have created a really nice systematic way. And they also created the rubrics associated to each one of these. I'm not showing that to you, but they created the rubrics associated to these. So this is an example of individualized. Before, when they would come in, the rubrics would be like done. They could shift them a little bit to make sure that they worked. But in this case, they're working and creating something that is more meaningful to them as the program. And I let it be. Nobody else uses numbers. They're the only ones that use numbers like this. Everybody else uses like either beginning, intermediate, and advanced. But I allowed them to have the flexibility to create these different mechanisms for this. And that is very helpful when you're actually looking at engagement into assessment. So this is showing that assessment plan. And the assessment plan, I just wanted to show you about like the performance targets, which is essentially their rubric. And they now put these rubric on these assignments, and now they assess on these assignments. They assess, they look, they review, and they make changes on any of these assignments. And then they go on to the next course or the next PLO. So there's some great kind of standardization within the program. However, this could never be done in English, right? So one, English doesn't like to use rubrics. So they, in the course itself, they don't mind using rubrics outside the course. But in this case, they actually utilize it. It made a lot of the faculty within math and within some of those high level courses kind of like jump in and take this assessment because they had this individualized look. We didn't force them to do anything in particular. Here's the next form, which you have in your resources. It's just the assessment plan. You saw that for math. This form again is very flexible and dynamic. They often every single year have to have that flexibility in order they allow that flexibility and ask, hey, do you need your assessment plan changed? So every check-in, I do check-ins. I do office hours. I saw those. I do assessment, what I call assessment and data office hours, where I have our institutional research team and I do data and assessment hours. And it's on we have like a common hour, which is it happens to be Tuesday afternoon. And it's always on their common hour away from most of the other courses. And I make them hybrid. So either they can go in person or they can do it on Zoom, which allows us to have that flexibility. But in that case, I've helped with faculty to like change their assessment plan, and when I connect with institutional research, we can allow to get some pretty high level data for each one of the programs, which is nice. Institutional research and I work really well together, and they want to improve these outcomes for the students. So that's one way we do it. Gen Ed I want to talk a little bit about gen ed assessment because gen ed assessment is still one of those things that I'm trying to enforce, but I worked on program assessment now, but I helped to engage with some of the faculty that do have gen ed assessment courses, and in this case, it's criminal justice. That had gen ed assessment courses to help establish rubrics with them and to use the rubrics for what are called essential learning outcomes, and also help them to establish rubrics with their PLOs. So one of the big things that I feel like for a culture of assessment is making sure that you're available when it comes to that rubric definition. Oftentimes they just are a little off and they just need a little bit of assistance or a look over, and that's very helpful for that quick feedback. So this is one of the ones that we did. It's Criminal Justice 104, and I'm going to talk about that one in just a second too. But I want to talk about what Amber Marchek, which is our professor of criminal justice,
stated. They said, and she's one of my what I call assessment champions, and I think I saw that somewhere too. Always have your assessment champion. They are very helpful to make sure that the word is spread that you are there to help. I don't know how many times in a meeting I've heard her say, Amber, or she would say, Nicole will help you make that rubric if you want. Or Nicole is great at responsiveness, so she has become like one of my major assessment champions. So the new assessment structure makes the annual cycle way easier to plan out for the 10-year program review. So the reason why I put criminal justice in here is because we did do a program review on them last year. And so in that program review, even though they only had 2 years of data within this new system, they were so ready to come up with, they knew already their enrollment. They weren't surprised about enrollment because I require that in my annual report just to give them a quick look. They already had some program assessment, and I even saw sometimes from the annual report to the program review, just like a copy and paste in that of that information because they were already building it in there. So making it so that it's easier for the faculty not to be so inundated with this larger program review. So a lot of my annual reports are just kind of ways to help to implement the program review. I love that question. Are you looking at Gen Ed as a program? Yes and no. So, because we need some revisions on our Gen Ed too. Uh, we have a lot, we go by the value-based rubrics. And so the value-based rubrics are pretty massive, and we have 12 different ones. And it is a lot for the faculty. We also have the sub-outcomes. All of these were made prior to me. So I'm trying to do what I can with that, including like helping with the faculty with Gen Ed assessment. And I do that already are putting into their courses in there. But I don't necessarily think of it as a program as much as being involved with some of the courses within our unit. So more of the core curriculum. Although because I have to do both, I almost do consider it as a program because it's important for me to make headway on it too. But the way I've been trying to do it now is trying to incorporate it within some of the courses that I know already have the ELOs or essential learning outcomes. Um, I also wanted to make a mention that within this one, and this is one of the reasons why that flexible is so important. So they did create an assessment plan for Criminal Justice 104, which is our intro to admin justice. They looked at it and they did find that they did not meet ELO 3 or PLO 1 by the percentage that they wanted. Those performance targets are established by faculty, not by me, and they did not meet those. But they gave some really good feedback of how to fix that assignment in order to meet some of the program learning outcome and our essential learning outcome on it. It was so interesting though that we actually had an outside evaluator for a program review that almost said the same exact thing, and they didn't have this data at that point. Almost said the same exact thing as the faculty member, that there needed to be some curriculum adjustments. They really just needed to add more about solid policing and courts, but it just validated the faculty when they saw that and they created that assessment, and an outside evaluator saw that too, how it is so important to make those little small meaningful changes. So were already making adjustments while the outside evaluator is going through this, and then the outside evaluator said the same thing, so allowing them to have almost that pride that they already figured out some of these curriculum issues that were happening by these assessment. And that's where that individualized and almost that assessment drive. Amber, I want to talk really much about her. She actually, when I first started, she told the provost that she's done with assessment. She doesn't want anything to do with assessment. And then the provost was like, oh my, what are we going to do without Amber? And because of kind of our relationship and how like we have created this bond, now she only wants to do assessment. Like she really would like to improve some of these curriculum items. And our criminal justice only has 3 full-time faculty, so it's really small. So she's doing a lot of work for her program, and I'm trying to help her out as much as possible. So that is a lovely way to try to help. I want to talk a little bit, and I don't know if anybody said, let me turn this off. I'm going to put the next one about student success. Looking at the time too. This is my next question. Oops. Oops. It's the first one. I don't know why. Okay, hold on. It's fun to try to do both. This is the question. What do you think your most successful strategy for engaging faculty? So I do want to talk about, I'm only one individual, but I have been trying to help out with some of their success programs. That's what I've been calling it, is success programs assessment. And that's in a way to incorporate things like our writing center, our faculty learning center, our academic success center, and then now I'm helping with career services and some of the student affairs. Uh, I have helped them, and this is an important attribute of kind of that transparency, is that there's a lot of faculty, small faculty, I'm sure many of you can relate, that just wonder what people are doing, like what their job is, how are they changing anything. And the transparency key here for our faculty, and this is academic faculty, I support these individuals, which is the Faculty Learning Center. And what that does is give the transparent information to the faculty so those questions can be answered without being hurtful or mean, which is what some of the faculty will automatically do. They will see, hey, there's reports. The Writing Center, our Faculty Learning Center, Academic Success Center, we have a scholars program, all are doing these report and still doing the exact same thing as their program assessment. So as their programs are doing. So they are trying to improve practices, in this case for faculty. I think that has been so helpful to just one, to support my admin faculty or professional staff. We're called admin faculty here. It's to support my professional staff to engage with faculty meaningful. And then the other way is to create these transparent mechanisms where our academic faculty will have the opportunity to see how other departments and programs are doing it. So in this case, those programs are are um, are utilizing this almost as a way to communicate with the faculty. So with their academic faculty. So for example, this one is showing specifically about faculty and staff surveys, how they would like to change and look at some of the pedagogical perspectives of working with faculty and their professional development, and then talking about course design. And they did an event scale, and they did anonymous feedback, and they have already instituted a lot of changes, and this is from last year, a lot of changes based on their feedback, which is really nice. So going back to that circle, remember after you do your program learning outcomes, and you map them, and then you do that assessment plan, I do require to have an annual assessment report. And there's a varying amount. I didn't put any examples, but I'm happy to give you an example if you want to email me. There's a varying amount of what effort these faculty are putting into the annual assessment report. These annual assessment reports, of course, are due every year. I make them go from August to October. The reason why I do that time frame, just to give you some mechanisms of culture assessment, is most of the time, their key assessments are at the end of spring. And because it's at the end of spring and they of course are off in summer, I don't want to make any of those items due during the summer. So I have shifted all timeline to October. And of course it's hard for September. And so they recognize that I know their experience and allow some of that flexibility. And in fact, most of the time, those faculty members, I have 100% return. Some of them don't do the best job on annual report, but I have 100% return on all of these annual reports. And now they have appreciated some of the mechanisms in there. So one of the big things, and probably a little bit of the change, you're going to see some of the other ones are pretty typical of an annual report, but I like them to look at data. So, and I feel like it's important for my executive administration to look at data too. Like, I think that's an important mechanism, but I also want them to look at data for enrollment before they gets to that 10-year program review. So they have some updates that they're required to do. And if there is no update, they put no curriculum updates on there, but or no faculty updates, but they are required to do some updates and they give me some student enrollment numbers and they can do it any way they want. Um, and then any program updates and some of my reports, this could be as small as like a half a page, but some of my reports, they're like 3 pages long. And I think that's because they want that information for that program review. They're like, might as well put it in now, just like when you want to do your CV and you wait for 3 years to do your CV, same concept. Why wait 10 years? That's a long time. Might as well put in these annual reports. I hold them all, so anybody can look at them. Might as well put in these annual reports where we have them as a reporting mechanism. So some people go really crazy, and then we do have like minimal that they only have to really talk about student enrollment in there, and some go very minimal. I do allow that flexibility in there just as long as they do that part three, which I'll talk about in just a second. Another really important aspect, and I think for those that were here at the beginning, I said it was like a one-stop shop. They did assessment one day and they never thought about it for the rest of the year. Now I have a continuous improvement section, which is our section two. And in that case, they need to look at previous reports and previous program reviews in order for them to see what happened with that. So if there's recommendations, if there's, for example, the criminal justice that actually showed how for criminal justice it showed how we needed to change that curriculum and that was a recommendation. Well, did they do that? How did it affect those students? They don't have to do a full-blown assessment, but they need to just check on it. So doing a real quick check, asking the faculty member, hey, we changed your rubric for just one with the items. How are students responding to that? Do you want any more feedback? Do you need any more changes? What do you think is happening with the students? And that feedback is kind of what closes the loop and makes sure that there's continuous improvement, that we're not um, forgetting about the previous years. So that's this section. And then the third section, and again, you can look at the template. I know it's pretty small. It's talking about the outcomes assessment. So we all know those outcome assessment. I don't really need to go into a huge amount of detail here, but it has artifact section, assessment method section, a rubric formation section. It has performance targets. They're established by faculty. I help them with some of the stuff with the performance targets. And now those are even adjusting now as they're going through this in their third round, because sometimes the performance targets were too high or too low. And so now they're adjusting some of those performance targets. And then they have to do quantitative and qualitative findings. And then the big thing that they also didn't do before is recommendations. So sometimes the recommendations were only talking about that assignment. And we want that because that's what assessment is. But I want them to also look at the full report, including the data, including that continuous improvement, to come up with some recommendations. So some examples of these recommendations is, for example, our history program just decided our history program is fully online, and it had some issues where there was a lot of faculty on sabbatical. So I adjusted or helped them adjust their assessment plan for this last year, and they figured out and they looked at the peer um, and then the peer institutes for these online history programs, and they assessed where they're at with curriculum. And so this year, the recommendations, they have like 3 recommendations, is to create some marketing strategies and to adjust some of their online mechanisms because their online mechanisms were a little low compared to their peer institutes. Um, and that and that is what they're kind of looking at for this year, but not in just outcomes assessment. So that's more as like a program goal. So they created these discussion questions, and now they're looking at both the outcomes assessment for this year and some like increasing marketing, which is pretty neat that they're constantly creating and changing some of these mechanisms. And again, that allowing that flexibility does that. Now, Canvas outcomes. I could do an entire thing about Canvas outcomes if anybody's used Canvas outcomes before. But Canvas outcomes is a great mechanisms in Canvas, our LMS, that it uses that global outcome and it holds it in for each one of the students. If they use them, and now I have several, our entire School of Education is using Canvas outcomes, our entire nursing is using Canvas outcomes, math, psychology, and I want to say two other ones are using Canvas outcomes, and our Gen Ed uses Canvas outcomes. With the Canvas outcomes, it really makes it easier for the faculty. If they know how to use rubrics, and I'm happy to help them with the rubrics, it's one quick rubric make for me. And then I also give you some videos, by the way, in the resources that show like what I give to the faculty members, which are like little 1 minute videos. I don't even talk about them of how to like click on and make sure you get Canvas outcomes into your course. Um, so that one little change is now making these faculty look at higher level data. So psychology, I'm going to show you that one right now. I think after I show you this, this is just a real quick of how it looks. I know it's really hard to see and I can't even make this bigger, but Canvas Outcomes makes it so that you just put it at the bottom if you don't know anything about it and is not worth points. So I know it's hard to see, but there's no points attached to these at all. So you can make them worth points if you want, but of course faculty don't want that. And then anytime you have a little target symbol, that usually means it's a global outcome. That is a little bit of work on me, but now it's rolling, so there's not a lot of huge things. Now it's kind of on the faculty to put it into their rubrics. So there's a whole bunch of data that's coming out just because they're starting to add these Canvas outcomes. Some faculty, again, don't like rubrics, so they don't even like the Canvas rubrics. I do have a little bit of adjustments for like School of Education is fully doing this, and I have a faculty member who does not like rubrics. So what I usually do with hers is if you if you put it into an assignment, you have to publish it and hide it into another module where the students can't even get to it. And then you can unpublish it, and then the faculty member still is able to do some grading on it. So it is a weird mechanism, but I have allowed like some faculty members that don't like rubrics to still use this rubric to assess their students. Most of the faculty members aren't like that though. They like the students to see the information. I also wanted to make note, and this is where it's really cool. If you use Canvas, the newest LMS, newest quizzes, excuse me, the newest quizzes has it available where you can actually add outcomes to specific questions, groups, or you can add questions to the entire quiz. So, and I'm gonna show you, I think it's coming, show you what one program actually did in just one semester. I'm using this for Gen Ed assessment, and so we have like over 3,300 points of this, and this is clickable. It's a Power BI that I created. I'm learning Power BI, you guys. It's difficult. I do a lot. I just like this stuff anyways. This is more my fun. But I created and pulled some of these Gen Eds into here. This was a previous, so this is a little bit longer ago. But let me talk to you about an example of this. So talking about psychology, if anybody has psychology in their degree, in their program or in their institutions, psychology is often because they have data and data systems, they are very data driven. They love data. They don't necessarily always like quantitative, but that's a cool thing about rubrics is that you can assess both. So they do both. What they did this last year, and then they have a really nice assessment plan that makes it so that they pilot in 1 year and then review it the next year. What they did this first year is make a rubric based on each one of the PLOs. So the first year they made this PLO rubric. I helped them put it into Canvas. They inserted it into a bunch of questions on exams. They inserted it into a bunch of questions on 2 exams, sorry, and 2 assignments. And then they assessed and looked at changes on it. So this is what our one of the professors of psychology, who is amazing, but will tell you how it is if it's not right. Um, she stated this one. She said, "We have greatly simplified and streamlined the process for outcomes assessment. First, we carefully revised our PLOs by reducing the total number, ensuring each one was measurable. They went down to 4 PLOs. They used to have 10. So that is a lot. Next, we developed a strong 10-year assessment plan that allows us to effectively assess each PLO over a 2-year period. This was critical in providing enough time for faculty to adjust the course once, receive and implement feedback, and be assessed again. So they are now changing these mechanisms, and that helps to change faculty load. That's what I was loved. I'm all about reducing faculty load and still helping the students. So they are gung ho on these Canvas outcomes, which makes it nice. Now, I want to take note that I pulled this data before we actually did some of the other, I said there were some assignments. This is one exam over 2 sections. So probably 30 students or something. But because they added so many of these outcomes to the questions, this is the total count of information. So 2,494. So probably 40 students are making this because they had it was like a 50-question quiz. They added some of the PLOs in different levels. So they either did beginning, intermediate, or advanced. And this is as simple as, and I'm pretty good with pivot tables, so I help this pivot table, but I'm more than happy to ask with my IR team to help with it and add some SQL information there. But this is showing the total count here. And then they were like, at first they saw this big spreadsheet. They're like, what are we going to do with this? And then I gave them this and they said, oh, check mark. Because they said, they wanted it to be 75% or better. And if you look at it, 89%, 72%, 89%. They looked at this 72% and they did some changes. And now they were so excited about just a check mark. So it just created these nice mechanisms, lots of data. They love the 2,100 or 2,400 amounts of data. So it was great for them to kind of almost get excited about a spreadsheet, which is super cool for me because I like spreadsheets too. And then some of the other accreditation examples is School of Education is doing this as well. So in this way, and this is one of the mechanisms that I used with School of Education, they do not have departments in School of Education, and the School of Education department School of Education, sorry, college, because they don't have departments and there's very limited faculty, what they've decided is to create an assessment coordinator position. All they have is a course release there, and I'm sure some of you have that area. This is an adjustment for them. Before it was just that one-stop shop, but I have now worked with Lori Navarrete. She's retiring this year, so I'm gonna cry, but I've now worked with Lori Navarrete. Lori Navarrete actually works with her faculty, and then I'm like the one that's collecting everything and collecting the data, helping them with rubrics. But Lori is kind of the one that's making sure that everything's being done, all the emails are being sent, everything is kind of, she makes it, if I have something due at the end of February, which I'll have a check-in due at the end of February coming up, she'll say, hey, make sure you have the check-in due like a week before. So she's essentially like my assessment helper and is a faculty member. I feel like that assessment champion, assessment coordinator is so important because oftentimes as assessment professionals, they just think, oh, this is just what I have to do. But if you have a faculty member that is just loves this so much and believes in it, and they tell their other faculty members, it is just a great domino effect of everybody supporting it. They do use Canvas outcomes as well in this one. So this in each program, there's 6 different programs there. And so they have each program, and then I'm able to look at, and this is going to be really small when I show it to you, but I'll make it a little bit bigger. So I'm able to look at, and of course they have to do some quantitative. Oops, too much. So they are able to look at, excuse me, each group. This is like bilingual ed, this is elementary mental health, which are EDS program. This is a minor, but remember I told you we do a minor that helps it to grow our graduate degree. This is special education and then our secondary science. So with this, we could look at each group individually. This is also Canvas outcomes as well. And then we could look at the whole teaching and what each one of those PLOs are doing too. So this was a nice mechanisms to kind of talk about each group. For example, some of these are really high, right? 96%, 98%. Like even that is a good discussion about making sure that we are making some meaningful greater reliability. So they are already talking about making a rubric and talking about like what each one would like giving examples and exemplars for everything so that we're not making it too easy on the faculty or on the students, right? We want to assess them at what level they're at for sure. Most of these, by the way, are 300 and 400 level courses in this last year. But for the most part, for the 100 level courses, they're seeing also that shift of almost too high of scores. But they're already doing that shift this next year. They made some great recommendations on that. Probably the coolest thing is we were CAPE accredited before, and anybody knows that CAPE is just like one of those accreditation bodies that sometimes is too much. But we are going for full AQUEP accreditation as of this next fall 2026. And that's purely because of how we're creating these assessment activities and assessment as where it's a very collaborative experience between the assessment coordinator, me, and each one of the units, which is really neat. And again, we're doing the same thing with nursing. So their accreditation is with the AACN, or sorry, CCNE, which is our nursing, and they use the standards AACN. MSN started first, but now all of nursing is going with Canvas outcomes, and they're putting them into the courses. And that started this year. So pretty neat, cool things are happening, and they're all looking at it, and I'm helping as they're assessing it. We don't have a huge amount of time, and that's okay because this is Act Two. This is where I'm at now. So I created this positive culture assessment, but we need to really make it so that it keeps on extending out, right? We need to make sure right now they were very program focused, but we want to make sure that it's still talking to our mission as the university and also talking to the mission of our Nevada state. So we create some data-driven practices. I've been now implementing some strategic plan initiatives to make sure their voices are heard within the strategic plan, which of course means budget. I created some AI enhanced frameworks and talking about professional development within that. I created a chat bot that helps align their program learning outcomes with our standards and our accreditation standards. And then now we're also communicating as a whole what each program is doing and kind of common themes between each group. So this is like an ongoing, this is my Act Two because this is this year. And I'm not even going to go through these, but I gave you some example activities of what we did in Assessment Summit. I remember I told you at the very beginning, the Assessment Summit was all one-stop shop. They did their outcomes assessment, they left and never talked about it again. So now I created this assessment summit. I shortened it. Now it's only like a 3-hour workshop. And the assessment summit had activities that were talking about accreditation and strategic discussion. So getting their voices heard within the higher level. And they love that, right? They gave me an earful about how they didn't know some of our accreditation and our strategic plan. So they love to be able to, and they don't have, oftentimes these faculty members don't have time to just sit and read a strategic plan, but giving them activities and responses to help and feedback mechanisms to help with some of that. They were really interested in it, which is really nice. I also do dashboards. So I work with IR and help with dashboards. I do that for twofold. I get their feedback about what might not be happening in dashboards. It also means that they're continuously looking at their data. They love that data information. And then I also implemented a peer review peer review where they looked at each other's annual reports and they gave feedback to each other. And this is also very helpful for two reasons. One, they can see where they might not be doing so hot, and then they can also help their fellow faculty members. So we've now created it more of a collaborative space. And I've made it so that used to be School of Education was all School of Education. School of Nursing would only be School of Nursing. LAS, which is our liberal arts, would only be liberal arts. So now they're almost creating an entire collaborative community. Still, they like to keep in their silos a little bit, but at least in the assessment summit, I could see some of those mechanisms happening. So it's been a kind of a cool experience. My next steps is to try to integrate the Canvas outcomes with the data warehouse. We haven't done that yet, but that's actually, I think next week I have a meeting for that. We also have a new strategic plan, so I want to initiate those into the annual enrollment and the assessment plan so that they can do some meaningful changes within institution level. And then I'm hoping to get more buy-in with Canvas outcomes with all of these groups now working. And then we really want to look at AI enhancements so we can have faculty workload be a little bit less. So those are kind of the next steps. And that, I know that doesn't give us a huge amount of time, but I'm going to give you my last question. And if there's any question, hold on. I also want to do the last question, which is I did this all by myself. I've had some community. I worked with a LEHE, but I would love what are some ways that assessment individuals and similar institutions that don't have money, that's one-man shops like me, can work together for assistance, collaboration, and even event session. So these are some mechanisms that I'm looking at least in my doctorate. And let me give you the link too, if that QR code isn't going for those that came in late. And is there any questions? Give it about a minute. Yeah, Julie, it's not really a rhetorical question. I'm thinking about it because I want to do that for my doctorate, but I feel like I just had to go into this position. There wasn't much for me. And so I really want to make it so that some kind of community practice, some kind of if there's a good online sharing area. So I'm still like in the works of like how we can talk to each other. What's the best mechanism to talk to everybody? That's one of the reasons why I like to do these presentations. So because I've gotten a lot of over the entire country, a lot of people have like talked to me because I know Canvas outcomes and talked to me and emailed me and to create those collaborative experiences. But I want something that it doesn't just have to be Canvas outcomes. It could be for anybody, right? It could be for any idea. I love it. I'm going to reach out to you, Julie. I want to thank everybody. This is it. I want to thank everybody. Please, if you have any questions, hopefully you can use any of those resources. But if you have any questions, if you want to set up an appointment with me, I'm happy to talk about any of the items and have a lovely rest of your day, especially if you're on the East Coast.